President Trump also softening his tone on China after Friday's threat of new 100% tariffs on that country starting November 1st.
Joining us now, CNBC Global supply chain reporter Lorianne LaRocco and Bloomberg News anchor and correspondent David Gura. Lorianne, what's it like at the ports right now with these tariffs?
It is ugly, Katie. We actually have a quintuple tariff hit today. The first is the 10% tariff on timber and the 25% tariff on kitchen cabinets and furniture. This is going to be inflationary, Katie, for the consumer as well as the home builder.
The world's two largest economies are back on a collision course, and this time, neither side is blinking. Late last night in Washington, President Donald Trump made the announcement that stunned markets and rattled capitals worldwide a 100% tariff on all Chinese imports, a move so aggressive that even his closest advisors were caught off guard. And within hours, Beijing answered, not with diplomacy, but with a declaration. We do not want a tariff war, but we are not afraid of one. From Washington to Beijing, from the factory floors of Shenzhen to the trading desks of New York, one question now echoes. Has the trade war just been reborn, or has it entered something far more dangerous? Good evening, I'm Anchor Name, and tonight on Global Trade Watch, a story that could reshape the world economy, trigger a supply chain earthquake, and test how far two superpowers are willing to go to prove who's in charge. It started with a single post, in classic Trump fashion, bold, blunt, and timed for maximum impact. Starting November 1st, all Chinese imports will face a 100% tariff. America will no longer be played. The message hit social media like a thunderclap. Within minutes, analysts were scrambling, markets were tumbling, and a new wave of economic uncertainty washed over the globe. The U.S. president had fired the first shot, and this time the target was everything: electronics, machinery, clothing, even pharmaceuticals. If enforced, that single decision could double prices on thousands of everyday goods. A laptop that cost $1,000 might soar to $2,000. A $30 set of car parts could become $60. It's a tax that would ripple through every home, every store, every factory. Yet the political message was unmistakable. Trump wanted to show strength, and he wanted Beijing to feel it. But what the U.S. called economic defense, China called economic warfare. Hours later, as dawn broke over Beijing, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce issued its reply, a statement dripping with defiance. If the U.S. persists in unilateral actions, China will resolutely take corresponding measures. Another line followed, simple, chilling, and repeated across every Chinese news outlet. We are not afraid to fight. It wasn't just rhetoric. Beijing hinted that its counterpunch would reach beyond tariffs into the minerals, technologies, and materials that the modern world runs on. That means rare earths, the metals inside electric cars, fighter jets, and smartphones. China controls nearly 90% of global processing capacity. If it slows the tap, the West shudders. And just like that, a trade feud began morphing into something bigger. An economic arms race over the raw ingredients of the 21st century. The reaction was instant. The S&P 500 plunged nearly 3%, its steepest drop in months. Tech stocks fell hardest, Apple, Tesla, and Nvidia all bleeding red. In Shanghai, investors woke to the same nightmare. Billions wiped off market value before lunch. Oil prices swung, shipping rates spiked, and across trading floors, brokers whispered what no one dared to say aloud. Are we heading back to 2018? That year's trade war between the U.S. and China cost the global economy an estimated $700 billion. But this time, the scale is far larger. Because the stakes now include energy, technology, and military readiness. To understand why China's threat matters, you have to understand what rare earths really are. They're not actually rare, but refining them is costly, toxic, and politically messy. Over 3 decades, Western nations quietly let Beijing dominate the business. Now, nearly every smartphone, missile, or electric motor depends on Chinese supply. So when Beijing imposes export controls, as it did earlier this month, citing national security, it's not just paperwork, it's leverage. Trump's 100% tariff, therefore, hits the goods that need those very materials. The question becomes, who suffers more? The U.S. manufacturer who needs the parts or the Chinese exporter who sells them? Economists say both. But politics rarely listens to economists. Sources tell Global Trade Watch that the decision was pushed through after a series of high-level meetings last week. Treasury officials reportedly warned of serious inflationary blowback. But senior advisors, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, argued that America's dependence on Chinese goods was a national security threat. "This is about control," one advisor said. "You can't let your rival hold the batteries, the chips, and the magnets that power your military." In that room, the argument wasn't just about economics. It was about pride, sovereignty, and the next election.
Trump wanted a headline that screamed, "America fights back," and he got one. China's playbook, however, is subtler. Rather than matching tariffs dollar for dollar, Beijing tends to strike where it hurts most, the regulatory battlefield. Already this week, Chinese regulators have launched an antitrust probe into Qualcomm's pending acquisition of Autotalks. They've tightened inspection rules for U.S. agricultural imports, and insiders hint at the possibility of curbing exports of lithium and gallium, materials crucial for semiconductors. Each step looks small, but together they form a pressure campaign. Precise, deliberate, and devastating over time. Beijing's message is clear. We can hurt you without firing a shot. Meanwhile, the rest of the world watches nervously. European leaders fear being forced to choose sides. Asian economies dependent on Chinese supply chains are quietly redrawing trade maps. India sees opportunity, a chance to attract manufacturers fleeing uncertainty. In Brussels, diplomats are whispering about a trade NATO, a loose coalition of democracies coordinating supply chain resilience. In Beijing, state media mocks that idea as economic containment. Every move on the chessboard deepens the divide, not just between the US and China, but between two visions of the global economy, one led by open markets, the other by strategic control. Tonight, the world stands at a crossroads. Will the coming weeks bring negotiation or retaliation? Can either side afford to blink first without losing face? And what happens if both dig in? Because if history tells us anything, it's that tariff wars rarely stay contained. They spread from markets to politics, from diplomacy to daily life. And once ignited, they are almost impossible to stop. Coming up, why Trump is 100% tariff may be less about economics and more about election year psychology, and how China's countermeasures could reshape technology itself. Stay with us. This story is only the beginning. Coming up next, we dive deeper into what's really driving this economic standoff, because this isn't just about trade or taxes, it's about control. Control over the future, of energy, of technology, of power itself. The official White House statement framed the new tariffs as a defense mechanism. It said America can no longer allow itself to be dependent on hostile nations for critical goods. Behind closed doors, however, insiders admit this move was designed to pressure Beijing ahead of the upcoming Trump-Xi summit expected later this month. The administration sees leverage in chaos. Push hard, shake the table, then negotiate from strength. But Beijing isn't playing by Washington's script. China's message is steady and disciplined. It refuses to appear cornered. While U.S. officials speak of tariffs and sanctions, China speaks of resilience and sovereignty. And between those two narratives lies the uncertainty that's now gripping every global investor. Let's look at the bigger picture. Why now? Why reignite a trade war when inflation is already haunting American households? Analysts point to two overlapping motives. First, political momentum. Trump has made economic toughness toward China a centerpiece of his platform. It's a message that resonates with voters who feel globalization hollowed out their jobs and towns. Second, strategic deterrence. Washington wants to send a clear signal that no nation, not even China, can weaponize supply chains against the United States. The problem is, Beijing already has. Rare earths, batteries, solar panels, chips, the backbone of modern industry runs through China. Cut that link too suddenly, and you risk crippling the very systems you're trying to protect. This morning, Chinese state television ran a pointed segment. It showed long lines of container ships leaving ports under red banners reading, "Made in China for the world." The anchor's voice carried an unmistakable tone of pride. He said, quote, "Trade with China is not a favor. It is the engine that keeps the world running. That's not just propaganda. It's a warning. And it lands differently when you realize how deeply integrated Chinese manufacturing is." Take the American auto industry. Every electric vehicle battery produced in the U.S. depends, in some capacity, on Chinese minerals or processing. Every solar panel installed across Europe uses wafers refined in China. And every smartphone assembled anywhere on Earth still needs a Chinese component somewhere in its circuitry. That's the hidden reality of globalization. And it's why this confrontation feels so dangerous, because there is no clean break. Inside Beijing's leadership circles, the calculus is pragmatic. They understand that a prolonged trade war would slow China's growth, but they also know something else. The U.S. is vulnerable too. By weaponizing trade, Washington risks pushing the rest of the world closer to China's orbit. Already, countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East are signing new yuan-based deals, expanding Belt and Road projects and reducing reliance on the U.S. dollar. So while tariffs make headlines, the quiet battle underneath is about currency, supply, and influence. Let's bring in the expert voices shaping the debate. Economist Paul Donovan calls this the era of strategic protectionism. He says, quote, "The goal is no longer free trade. The goal is controlled trade, trade that serves national power." Former U.S. Treasury analyst Lisa Cook warns that 100% tariffs could backfire spectacularly. In her words, you can't wall off the world without walling off your own economy. And in China, political scholars see the U.S. move as a psychological tactic, a test of China's endurance rather than its economy. They believe Trump is betting that Beijing will compromise before the U.S. consumer feels the pain, but that assumption may underestimate China's appetite for long-term struggle. The last time the world saw a confrontation like this was in 2018. Back then, tariffs were limited to certain sectors: steel, aluminum, consumer electronics. Now, the scope is total. It's a full-spectrum confrontation touching energy, chips, agriculture, and finance. In 2018, there were still back channels, negotiators meeting quietly in Singapore and Geneva. This time, the tone is openly combative. Both sides speak not like partners negotiating trade, but like rivals defending empires. Across the Pacific, American farmers are bracing for impact. If China retaliates with agricultural tariffs, soybeans, corn, and pork exports could plummet again, just like during the first trade war. In small towns across Iowa and Kansas, the memories of 2018 never faded. Farmers remember empty silos, canceled contracts, and government bailouts that barely kept them afloat. One farmer told a local station today, "We thought we'd survived the last trade war. We didn't expect another one this soon." Meanwhile, manufacturers in Detroit are running cost projections through the roof. Every imported bolt, battery, and circuit board now carries risk, and the risk for many is existential. But there's another side to this, one that plays to Trump's political advantage. For his base, tariffs are a symbol of defiance, a promise that America will never again bow to foreign economic power. The optics of toughness matter, especially in an election year, and every time China pushes back, it strengthens Trump's image among voters who believe globalism weakened America's industrial might. So yes, the tariffs may hurt the economy, but politically, they could help him. For Beijing, the game is patience. Chinese officials have been emphasizing internal resilience, investing in domestic demand, supporting export diversification, and building ties with Southeast Asia and Africa. They're also boosting subsidies for local chip makers and rare earth refineries, signaling that China intends to withstand external shocks. The phrase repeated across Chinese state media this week is simple: steady determination. It's meant to show that China will endure whatever storm the U.S. stirs up. But even within China, some voices worry. Private manufacturers quietly admit that another prolonged tariff war could squeeze profit margins and trigger layoffs. The tension between national pride and economic pragmatism is growing. Markets remain on edge. Global investors are moving cautiously, rotating funds into safe assets, gold, bonds, and energy stocks. The dollar strengthened briefly, but analysts warn that sustained tariffs could fuel domestic inflation. In Asia, the yuan dipped slightly but stabilized after China's central bank intervened. Meanwhile, shipping companies are preparing for a surge in rerouting costs. Some have already begun diverting cargo through Vietnam and Malaysia to avoid direct tariffs, a strategy known as transshipment. In other words, global commerce is adapting in real time to a political showdown. The White House says the tariffs are temporary, but so far there's no timeline, no negotiation framework, and no defined conditions for rollback.
That uncertainty is perhaps the most dangerous weapon of all. It freezes investment, slows trade, and sows fear across the global economy. Experts say this climate of unpredictability could push the world closer to recession if tensions on IT resolved soon, and yet both leaders seem determined to project confidence. Trump insists America can win this trade war outright. Xi Jinping, in a speech marking the anniversary of China's economic reforms, declared that no external pressure can stop China's progress. It's a duel of narratives, resilience versus dominance, and somewhere between those slogans, the fate of global trade hangs suspended. So where does this go next? There are whispers that diplomatic channels remain open. A meeting between U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng is reportedly in the works, but insiders caution that progress is limited. Each side wants concessions before talks even begin. If diplomacy fails, Phase 2 could unfold quickly. That might include expanded U.S. sanctions on Chinese banks, further export bans on American software, or Chinese restrictions on foreign financial access. It's a dangerous escalation ladder, and right now both sides are already climbing. In the next segment, we'll break down possible scenarios, from quiet compromise to a full-blown global trade war, and analyze what this means for consumers, investors, and the stability of the modern economy. Because one thing is certain, this isn't just another policy dispute. It's the front line of a new world order, where trade is power, and power is war by other means. Stay tuned. This is Global Trade Watch.